2025 is the final year for pay-per-views. Hallelujah. We're not going to have to pay $80 to get Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland 2 from now on. And today I thought we'd go down memory lane and we're going to compare every single UFC pay-per-view from 2024 to 2025. Starting off with the January ones, we have 297 versus 311. I think 311 was better by a landslide, y'all, okay? What kind of tragedy, what kind of atom bomb did they drop on Canada last year? We had to deal with Strickland versus DDP, which was actually a really good fight. Really fun back and forth. I get a lot of people who are crying robbery over, here's the fucking thing, you guys. I'm going to go to war for you fucking guys. I get it, okay? A lot of people thought Strickland won, but fun fight regardless. But it seems like that was the only highlight and the only memorable thing from the card. You had the co-main of a literal world championship fight in Bueno Silva versus Pennington. Sorry, I'm falling asleep just talking about it. But then we had Magny. I would say fraud checking Mallet, but honestly, Magny, it seems like it's been doing that to everybody left and right. That's not just that top 10 level, but regardless, you had Magny and Mallet on the main card. You had Curtis versus Marc-Andre Barrieux on the main card. You had Evloev versus Allen, which was a fun scrap, really fun fight. But like the prelims then, okay? The prelims just had nothing, bro. I mean, Sam Patterson with a nice submission, that was crafty, but like, what are we even doing here? There's nothing else to even talk about from the prelims, okay? And the fact that Chris Curtis versus Marc-Andre Barrieux was on the main card, Neil Magny was on the main card, Raquel Pennington for a title fight on the main card, it was crazy. So I think 311 wins by a mile, man. 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles, Jesus, because you had Islam Makhachev subbing Moicano, Marab versus Umar. Still, it's the end of the year, and yet this fight from the beginning is still holding up as one of the best fights we've seen this year. It had everything you want. You had Prohashka versus Hill. Obviously, we're all rooting for Yuri. We love these kind of comeback KOs, and obviously it was fantastic to see and great fight in general. You had Almeida, who I get a lot of the time can smudge it up against a Volkov or Derek Lewis, but in this one, we actually got a finish from him against Spivak. Renier de Ritter subbing Holland. Barcelos versus Talbot. Say what you want about the fight, but it was damn interesting to say the least. You had Bakoyev TKOing Reese. Not TKOing, he put the man's soul up here, okay? And then you had Guskov subbing Alakena. Dawson versus Ferreira was a pretty fun fight. Underrated fight, I dare say. And then the early prelims are nothing special, but in general, I feel like when you compare it to the trash card that Canada got versus the almighty card that LA got, I feel like it's no question that 311 was the better card, okay? Moving on to February, okay? We had UFC 298 versus UFC 312. I'm going to give some love to 298 here, man, for sure, because it seems like not only is Canada catching strays, but Australia, I say, had it even more rough. 312, you had DDP. Why are they stacking DDP on these foreign cards? They just have trash undercards. Jesus. But you had DDP versus Strickland, the rematch. You had Zhang versus Suarez. Both of those fights, man, listen, they are memorable, but it just seems more like it was domination fest for the champions and them just proving that they're levels above the other levels of competition instead of an actual fun fight or back and forth or memorable moments. You got Sean Strickland punching his nose back into place. But in general, the main and co-main really carried this card, and even then it wasn't anything crazy because the rest of the card, the feature fight, you had Taliesin Teixeira versus Justin Tafa, man. It's a goddamn tragedy. He KO'd him in 30 seconds. That was impressive, but regardless, you had Crute versus Bellato. Fun fight, to be honest. Genuinely, comparing it to a lot of the other fights this year, it was a really fun back and forth. Ended in a draw, unfortunately, but honestly, it makes sense. And then after that, dude, we're just falling off a cliff. You had Matthews versus Prado. It just was kind of a bit of a stink fest on the feet. Gabriel Santos had a nice submission on the prelims, but the prelims just had nothing special besides, okay, Topuria versus Thignesi was solid, and Topuria's brother was debuting. And I got to give a shout out to Ron Ju versus Cody Steele. That was a banger of a fight. Fantastic fight, but 312 as a whole, man, was just a lot of garbage in terms of quality of the card. Like, as a whole, man, how was this? They were charging us like $100 to pay for this, okay? A Justin Tafa feature fight, so it was kind of crazy. And 298 was a stellar card. It was fantastic. Topuria KOing Volk, okay? It was AI generated. We're not going to talk about that. But you had Whitaker versus Costa. Fun fight. Gary versus Neal. Marab versus Cejudo. Fun fight. Fluffy subbing Kopylov, Zhangmin Yang, and Marcos Rogerio de Lima got sick KOs. And in general, people talk about 298 and 299 and 300 as like some of the best back-to-back pay-per-views of all time. And it all kicked off with this one, man. So I'm clearly going to give this one a 298. Fantastic card. And when you're comparing it to the garbage that the Aussies got this year, I feel like it's not close, okay? Moving on to March here, we got UFC 299 versus 313. Listen, I think that this is an example of a good card versus a generational card. And unfortunately, the good card is UFC 313. Listen, I'm going to give this one a 299, okay? 313 was good. It was entertaining and had a lot of memorable moments, but in general, 299 was generational, dog. O'Malley versus Cheeto, Poirier KO and BSD, MVP versus Holland, JDM KO and Burns, and Jan starting his whole comeback arc, the redemption arc, like he's Thorfinn from Vinland Saga or something, beating up on Song Yadong, Blades KOing Almeida, man. Almeida was trying to stink it up, but too little, too blobby, too late, okay? And then you just had big name value in general. You have Matus Gamrot, RDA, Kyler Phillips, Asu Almabaya, Michelle Pereira, IQ Talaba. I could pass out just talking about this. They were really trying to hype up Sean O'Malley as the champion and really have a coming out party for him. And they stacked it up, man. And the card delivered with entertainment, nice back and forth wars. And in general, a lot of knockouts. So 299 wins this one, man. 313 was good, though. Again, good card, but it just wasn't that generational level. Pereira versus Ank was a boring fight. I know some people enjoyed it. I was genuinely falling asleep by that 4th or 5th round, man. It was a bit of a stinker. And not just because Ank won. I'm just talking about the outcome of I'm just talking about how the fight played out. You had Gaethje versus Fiziev 2, which was a fun fight, but it felt very similar to the first one. It just felt like we didn't even need that. Bahamundez subbing Turner was crazy. But then after that, you had Lemos versus Lucindo on the main card. Rufy getting a nasty KO over God damn it, Bobby, which was crazy to see, but Van versus Cerullo. Obviously, we know how Van, this is really where he's starting to prove to us that his takedown defense and how he holds in the scrambles can really hold up. Obviously, we're going to have to see how he does against Pantoja. We'll see it, but regardless, fun fight. Yeah, Pereira subbing Petrosian, Carlos Leo, KO, and Morono. Shit like that. Good card, but unfortunately, when it's going against 299, I got to give this one a 2024, okay? Moving on now to April. We have UFC 300 versus UFC 314. And again, nothing against 314. It was a great card, but like, I feel like 2024 with how I'm giving all these to right now. It's like the prime Undertaker on his WrestleMania streak right now. You know what I'm saying? Jeez, man, 2024 really started off pretty strong besides January. I got to give this one a 300, okay? 314, it was great. Volk versus Lopez was one of the best fights of this year still. Pimblett TKOing Chandler. Yair versus Pitbull was a stinker, but it is what it is. Silva submitting Mitchell. High beef, high stakes, and it was a high-paced fight in general. Reyes KOing Krylov, and what we thought was going to be the title run coming back ended up being him getting knocked out again in August, okay, or September, whatever it was. I don't want to talk about Reyes right now. It's unfortunate, but in general, Ige KOing Woodson. And the prelims in general were pretty fun, but we all know 300 is just a different animal. It's not even fair. You could put any pay-per-view against 300, and unfortunately, 300 is going to win 9.9 out of 10 days. So I'm going to be saying that 300 wins this one, man. It had all the name value, and in terms of how the fights played out, so many finishes. The only stinker I can really think of on the card was the Aljamain Sterling performance. Still got a good win, but 300 was fantastic, man. It had everything you wanted. It just, you know, Bo Nickel on the main card, stuff like that, a couple of the card placements and the early, whatever you want to say about it. There's things you could pick and choose, but as a whole, it was just a once-in-a-lifetime kind of card, okay? So I'm going to say 300 wins this one. Moving on up next to May here, we have UFC 301 versus UFC 315. So in my opinion, I mean, I got my little notes in front of me. Out of all of the cards that I'm going to be going through, or I'm sorry, all of the months I'm going to be going through especially, I feel like this is the real closest that you can kind of go back and forth on what do you think is better. I feel like there's a really good argument for 315 to be better. I think there's a really good argument for 301 to be better, okay? But unfortunately, what they do share, what they both have in common is that May, I guess, is just like that 1 month, man, where they just give us these kind of garbage pay-per-views on paper, at least. Both of them went above the expectations of what we thought they were going to be. There were crazy finishes or nice back and forth fights I'm about to get to. But in general, man, like Rio had a rough pay-per-view. People were not excited for this one, man. And then Canada had a rough pay-per-view once again. That's a common trend, but genuinely, thank God for that DeRitter versus Allen fight night. They actually proved that they can give Canada great cards. But in general, man, like, it's just, we weren't very excited for the May pay-per-views. I'm hoping that May 2026 is different, but it's probably not going to be. Yeah, what was the question? Yeah, you're getting Shevchenko once again as the main event, okay, kid? So I'm going to go with 301, though, for this one. I'm going to say 301 just edges it out. Pantoja versus Ursig was a great fight. Aldo versus Martinez, man. Having Aldo come out of retirement, man. How does his walkout song go? It's by, like, Jay-Z. It's like, something in the air. I I'm not going to edit that out, fucker, but I'm just saying. Then you had Smith submitting Petrino. You had Michelle Pereira with a round 1 sub, Barajo with a round 2 KO, Joe Anderson Brito with a round 2 KO on the prelims. You had Orabai versus Brenner. You had Mauricio D. Rufy trying to become the king of the Pirates on this one. You had Alessandria Costa as well with the early knockout. So, like, the name value wasn't too strong in this one, but actually had some pretty sick finishes as a whole. Some solid upsets as well, man. I'm pretty sure Aldo was the underdog. I think Smith was a really big underdog, shit like that. So, and then Usyk was a massive underdog, and he almost got the win. So in general, man, it could have been better in terms of name value, but how it played out, it was actually kind of entertaining. And then 315, I could say the exact same thing about it. Did y'all hear that voice crack I just did right there? 315, but I'm sounding like Prime Area Hawani, bro. But 315, man, it did go above expectations. I mean, Bilal versus JDM was a banger of a fight. Zahabi versus Aldo was a banger of a fight. You have BSD with a round 2 submission, Mike Mallet with a round 2 KO, Almacan and Andre Barriou with nasty round 1 knockouts. But this is, so what ultimately convinced me to go with 301 over 315, I had to sit through Shevchenko versus Fiorot, dude. I had to sit through Grasso versus Silva. Shevchenko versus Fiorot was just such a stinker. Such a halting of the momentum of a card. You know what I'm saying? And Shevchenko apparently is just continuing to do that with every card she touches. She's like, who's that one guy from like My Hero or something? And like everything he touches just crumbles to dust. That's like his quirk or some shit. I feel like that's what Shevchenko does to pay-per-views, man. Everything she touches just crumbles before our very eyes. And unfortunately, just halted the momentum of the card. Same with Grasso versus Silva, unfortunately. That was a little bit better, but in general, 315 had some banger fights and some sick finishes, but 301 had the same thing, except without any too much of the stinkers, you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to go with 301 to edge this one out, okay? Moving on now to early June. June usually has 2 pay-per-views, so early June, UFC 302 versus 316. I'm going to go with 316 for this one, okay? 302 was trash, dog. And not only in terms of the build-up, where it was completely relying on the main and the co-main to really carry through. They had to throw Kevin Holland on there last second, I believe, to kind of like add a bit more name value to the card. But like, you had Brown versus Dos Santos on the main card, and it wasn't that memorable fight. You had Nico motherfucking Price on the main card. What are we even doing here? Roman Kopylov, Jalen Almeida, Grant Dawson, Jake Matthews, Andre Lima were on the prelims. What are we even doing? And in general, there were just barely any finishes on this card. This was when the time, remember when everyone was saying about how, oh, the gloves are making the finishes go down. It was cards like this that were the reason why, dude. Just mostly decisions and forgettable ones at that. And then the co-main of Strickland versus Costa, where Strickland saying, I'm gonna go to war for you fucking guys. And then he's just doing nothing. It was a bit of a stinker and a letdown. And Holland got a nice sub over Olasejchik, and obviously Makhachev versus Poirier was an amazing back and forth. But it all goes back to my point that like that main event was really carrying this card, not only in terms of afterwards and all the outcomes, but in the build-up as well, man. All we were talking about was Makhachev versus Poirier and a bit of that co-main, but it seemed like everything else was just, you know what I mean? And then 316, I think a lot of people weren't too excited for it because it had a main event that didn't really make too much sense to us at the time. And in general, like, you know, you did have some ranked fights, but it was kind of like the number 13 versus 15. And then you kind of had the guys who were at the top of outside the rankings. And don't get me wrong, though, nothing wrong with that, but for a pay-per-view, I feel like we did kind of expect a little bit more. In general, though, it was a really fun card. I gotta be honest. I really enjoyed 316. It had a lot of bangers, man. Morale versus O'Malley. Morale get the sub. Harrison submitted Pena. God bless, man. Thank you, Jesus. You had Joe Piper versus Gaslam. Fun moments at times in that one. Batista versus Mix. Batista was just beating the shit out of him. It's not aging too great for him, but in general, solid performance from him. You know what I mean? Solidly entertaining to watch. We forgive you, Batista, okay? Holland submitting Luque, Van KOing Silva, setting the flyweight knockdown record. Mirzakhanov knocking out Ribeiro. Acosta versus Spivak was a nice back and forth fight. Pretty fun to watch, okay? Especially the blobs were getting after it. You can see the jiggles moving up and down the whole time, brother. And then you have the Korean Conor McGregor with a sick debut KO. And Killian Salkild had a nice performance over Ashmitz as well. So in general, 316 wins this one by 5 miles, 10 miles, man. Moving on up next to the end of June pay-per-views. The International Fight Week versus International Fight Week one here. 303 versus 317. I gotta give this one a 317, man. 303 was solid, don't get me wrong, but not even solid. It was good, okay? You had Pereira, KO, and Prohajka. Lopez versus Ige was a fun fight. Gary versus MVP was kind of a stinker, and Delidze versus Smith was kind of a stinker. Performances like that, and a couple other things in the prelims are why I can't really put it above something as amazing as what 317 ended up being. But, I mean, don't get me wrong, you had Pfeiffer, Talbot, Gene Silva, man. All of them had sick, nasty, disgusting disgusting, beautiful to watch early knockouts, okay? So 303 was full of violence, okay? I should literally just add full violence right now, but genuinely it was full of violence. It was amazing to watch, but in general, just had a bit of those stinkers to where 317 just had no stinkers, no room for boredom, man, okay? It was fantastic. Again, could have been a little bit better on paper in terms of the build-up and everything like that, but like how it delivered, that's all we're talking about, right? How it delivered, it was amazing, man. Genuine 9 out of 10, something like that. Topuria KOing Oliveira, AI generated, I get it, but it was still kind of crazy as hell to see. It showed how good Topuria is, especially at 155. Pantoja submitting Kai Kara France. Van versus Royval is one of the best fights I've ever seen. So that was on the main card. That was great. Dariush versus Moicano was kind of but regardless, fun first round. And in general, Dariush with the comeback was kind of crazy to see. Talbot versus Lima was a pretty solid scrap. Rodriguez and Delgado with round 1 knockouts. Okay, somebody check if Jack Hermanson, where is his soul? Is it still floating around my room? Can I catch it? Can I give it back to Hermanson, bro? Terrence McKinney with a round 1 sub. Jacoby Smith faced adversity at first, but he got a round 2 submission. 317 in terms of the outcomes had damn near everything you wanted. We got the back and forth and we got a lot of knockouts, and in general, very entertaining card. I got to edge this one out to 317 here, okay? Just had a bit more than 303. Moving on now to the July pay-per-views. We had 304 going against 318 here. This is a really close one to call. I could totally understand why people would pick 304 about this. I really, really can. But in my opinion, I'm going to edge this one out to 318 here, man. I feel like it was just the night of the unks and the night of the underdogs. And man, it was shining bright like a diamond, okay? You had Holloway versus Poirier 3, Costa versus Kopylov in a fun fight. In the main event, like I just said, very fun fight. D-Rod versus Holland, though, I would say was the best fight of the night. That might be a hot take, but genuinely such a back and forth, high-paced war. Pitbull versus Ige was kind of but I believe Pitbull, did he get him out of there? I don't even fucking remember if he won by a decision or TKO, whatever it was, but that was that. I think it was decision, but he almost hurt him in the second or something like that. But you had Johnson versus Selhuber. You had Allen versus Vittori. Really fun fight with that one. Adabagatir with a round 1 KO. Dulatov with a round 1 KO. Ryan Spann with a round 1 blobby sub. Bruno Ferreira with a round 1 sub. So the prelims had a lot of fun finishes. And then you had like just fun back and forth, man. Like Allen versus Vittori, D-Rod and Holland, and Holloway versus Poirier 3. Even Costa and Kopylov was solidly fun to watch. So 304 on the other end, I think had the better main card. I think it was the more entertaining main card. Like Edwards versus Muhammad, the rematch, everybody likes the shit on it, but it wasn't too bad to watch, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? It's a fight that you can kind of rewatch if you want. Aspinall versus Blades, obviously crazy knockout from Aspinall. Pimblett versus goddamn Bobby. And then you had Rodriguez versus Leroy Duncan. And, you know, he was beating him the fuck up on the ground in that one. You had Allen versus Chikadze in a nice back and forth. And it was a great main card, okay? What really is going to make me go with 318 above is that the prelims for 304 were just kind of forgettable, man. Do you guys remember at the post-fight presser when Dana White was just furious because he gave everyone, or he was offering a 100K bonus, and he was saying that nobody capitalized on it, and nobody was actually going for anything, so why even do that? And you had like Makayev versus Cobb, all the shit talk. There's like 18 security guards in there, and it was a stinker of a fight. I couldn't even tell you too much off the prelims, man. It was just a very forgettable amount of prelims, a lot of decisions, not too much memorable. Whereas 318, it had a good main card and good prelims, to the point to where a lot of decisions on the main card, but like they were fun fights for the most part. So in general, I'm going to edge this one out to 318. It just had a little bit more overall, you know what I mean? Moving on now to August here, UFC 305 versus 319, the Australia pay-per-view versus the Chicago pay-per-view. I'm literally from Chicago. I don't know how I'm forgetting, bro, but this is another close one, and I feel like it all comes down to the prelims, like once again, but I think 319 edges it out, man. I think 2025 takes this one. DDP versus Chimaev, yes, was a stinker for most people, but at least you had the high stakes of it. At least we were all talking about it like it's the most highly anticipated fight of the year. Ended up kind of being disappointing in terms of the entertainment, but just pure domination from Chimaev, and it could be worse. It could be worse, I guess, man. You had Murphy KOing Pico, nasty spinning elbow, and right before that, Prates doing that to Jeff Neal, man. MVP versus Cannonier, fun fight. Big old Tim Elliott submitting Kaya Sakura, Susarkayev submitting Nolan, and Alasacek KOing GM3, and Hernandez getting a KO over Hooper. Me, literally Chase Hooper, but I feel like how I just whipped off the hood like I'm Spider-Man taking off the mask and revealing like, it's me, Chase Hooper, you know what I mean? But in general, man, it had good prelims, good main card. I feel like it had a good balance here, whereas 305 had a really good main card and a couple of solid performances on the prelims, but in general, the prelims, there weren't even too many fights to begin with, and a lot of them were just kind of forgettable, at least in my opinion. You had Valter Walker starting the heel hook streak. That was fun to see. Jack Jenkins with a round 3 KO. That was nice to see. Like I said, the main card was great. DDP versus Izzy was a really fun fight, and DDP got the submission. Kai Kara France got a KO over Steve Erceg. That was nasty to see. Hooker versus Gamrot was a really fun fight, man, okay? Rosenstruck versus Tuivasa was kind of just like a S-tier blah versus S-tier blah, man. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't too memorable. And I think somebody had a 30-27 for Tuivasa, which was crazy. So that was a bit of a stinker of a fight. But other than that, man, you had Pratis KOing Li Jingliang. So you had, you know what I'm saying, Hooker and Gamrot. Kai Kara France with the knockout. DDP with the sub. Pratis with the KO. And then Tuivasa. Like, the main card was great, but I feel like the prelims just weren't anything special. Whereas 319 had a pretty great main card and some great prelims. So I'm going to edge this one out to 319, okay? Moving on up next to September here, but we got nothing to compare, fellas, okay? So we're just going to get into it with the early October pay-per-view. You had UFC 306, the Sphere card for obviously September of 24, but we didn't have a pay-per-view in September of 2025, okay? So nothing to compare for that one. We're just jumping into it with early October here. UFC 307 versus UFC 320, man. Both the Pereira pay-per-views here. I got to give this one a 320, okay? 307 was not good, my friends, okay? I feel like it was one of the weaker cards on paper, and how the actual outcomes and how it actually delivered ended up going, it wasn't anything too special, man. Pereira versus Roundtree was a really fun fight, and obviously a great finish from Pereira in the 4th. But, dude, you had, like, Batista versus Aldo in a robbery and a stinkfest. You had Pena versus Pennington, and what a lot of people said was a robbery and a stinkfest. You had Delidze getting just a really questionable TKO over Holland that left everybody more confused than impressed. And then you had Harrison versus Vieira, man. A domination fest. I mean, not even a domination fest, but like Harrison got a good win, but it's just nothing even too memorable or worth rewatching, or just, I want to forget it out of my own mind. You know what I mean? The fact that that was on the main card too. And don't get me wrong, the prelims, like, it had a couple moments. It had Ryan Spann with an early submission, man. You had Buckley KOing Wonderboy and was what was actually a pretty close, fun fight. But, like, that was kind of it. 307 just kind of stunk it up besides, like, a Buckley KO or Pereira versus Roundtree. You know what I mean? Whereas 320 had it all. You want to talk about generational cards, dude. 320 was fantastic here, okay? You had Pereira KOing Big Ang, Merab versus Corey, and one of the more fun Merab fights, and he almost knocked him out in the second. And then you had Yuri versus Roundtree, banger, back and forth. And that third round alone is one of the best rounds you'll ever see. Crazy comeback for Yuri. That's my boy right there, man. Zalal submitting Emmett in, like, what, like a minute? Crazy to see. Kind of ruined it on the mic afterwards, but, like, it is what it is. Pfeiffer submitting Magomed, man, showing how well-rounded he's developing to be. Gatir with a round 1 KO in the prelim. Santos KOing the Korean McGregor on the prelims. And then again, you had Mix kind of dropping the ball against Whiplash. That was interesting to see, I guess, to say the least, okay? Shabazian KOing Muniz, and just the early prelims as a whole were solid, to where 320 just had everything you wanted. It had the banger back and forth, Merab and Corey, Yuri and Roundtree. It had a lot of finishes with Gatir and Zalal and Pereira. It had so much, man, okay? Perfectly balanced, like Thanos says, is all things should be. So I'm going to give this one a 320 here, okay? Moving on up next to the late October card. This is the Abu Dhabi pay-per-views versus Abu Dhabi pay-per-view here. We had UFC 308 versus 321. I got to give this a 308, man, for sure. 321 was just such a disappointment, man. I know that Renat Fakhretdinov robbed Lille at 308, but Jesus, 321 robbed us of our damn near $100. You know what I'm saying? Aspinall versus Gane was fun while it lasted. It was great to see athletic heavyweights actually in there going back and forth. And it was very interesting to see Gane winning, but dude, it just, the ending cannot be forgiven, okay? It was like the choose your own adventure game, and then it's like you just got the bad ending, and you're like, well, fuck, man. What do I do now? You know what I'm saying? It's like the rematch is going to be more interesting and captivating now, but dude, it just, what a bummer end to the fight. The co-main I didn't even watch, okay? Like, I did a fight companion for it, and I literally, like, ended the stream and then started up again later, because I was like, I'm not going to watch this, boys. I'm about to go out tonight. This is my, like, 30 minutes to get ready, so I just did that, okay? And I ended up hearing that it was a stinker of a fight anyway, so that was the co-main. Umar versus Batista actually wasn't too bad, man. Really impressive performance from Umar here, okay? And in general, Batista did rock him, I believe, in the first or second, so that was wild to see. But then you had Volkov versus Almeida, which was just a stinker. It was a stinker of a fight. Questionable decision for a lot of people in general. I get why they did it. I understand it, okay? And justice for Volkov, and on top of the fact that he did land more damage, but just not entertaining to watch. It wasn't fun to watch. Say what you want about the scorecards, but like, it is what it is, man. You had Murzakanov KOing Rakic. That was sick as fuck. Salkill with the head kick KO. That was nasty as hell, okay? And you had Klein versus Rebecca, which was a fun fight. You had Valter Walker continuing the heel hook streak, okay? So don't get me wrong, like some moments like that, and the prelims had some gems, and Murzakanov started off the main card strong. But most of the main card just disappointed after that, and the prelims in general, and just a lot of this card, man, was just either disappointing or just nothing too memorable. It seemed like it was just setting up a lot of future events, you know what I mean? Whereas 308, man, that was the event. That was the canon event in the timeline. Topuria versus Holloway, man. Holloway was giving Topuria his toughest fight yet, okay? At least in terms of Topuria's title reign and shit like that. How did Josh Emmett survive, folks? Even then, it's not like Josh Emmett was doing much. Like, so really, Holloway has given Topuria the most adversity, okay? People forget, man. He took a round off of him, arguably two. And then you had Chimaev submitting Whitaker. Ang versus Rakic was okay, but like, it is what it is. It wasn't a bad fight to watch, don't get me wrong. Murphy versus Ige was a nice little back and forth. I kind of enjoyed watching that one. Shara with the double spinning back fist, okay? The goddamn pirate, man. Crazy to see with a wild KO, one of the best of that year. Rebecca versus Orabai was one of the best fights I've ever seen, especially that round 3, okay? So fantastic fight there. You had Jeff Neal and Ibo Izon and Kennedy Nzechukwu getting nasty KOs. Abus Magomedov versus Bruno Ferreira was a solid fight, and then Abus got a round 3 submission. And again, man, I get that like there was the Renat Fakardinov robbery, okay? But again, 321 just robbed our eyeballs of enjoyment. So in general, I'm going to say that 308 was just the clearly better Abu Dhabi pay-per-view, okay? I'm going to give that one to 2024. Moving on up next to November here, we have both of the Madison Square Garden pay-per-views, okay? 309 versus 322. I gotta give this one to 322, man, okay? Sorry for hesitating. It's not that it's, like, close in my mind. The reason I'm stuttering is, like, there's part of me that just wants to go on a full-blown rant about how much I just hated 309 and the build-up and the outcomes. And just, you shouldn't have even had Jones versus Miocic. You shouldn't have even had Oliveira versus Chandler, the rematch, go down. So right away, the two fights that were carrying this card hard, okay, were just kind of bullshit fights to begin with. And great, John Jones got a fucking knockout. And great, Oliver versus Chandler, too, was solidly fun to watch. But, like, dude, Nico versus Craig is the feature fight. What a stinker. Rufy versus Lion Top. Don't give... Lone Top? However the fuck you say it, okay? I'm sounding like Prime Jail Son in here. These two fights on the main card of MSG is crazy, especially when you compare it to the Izzy Pereira card or the fight for 322, that main card, okay? You had Arujo, Viviano, whatever the fuck her name is, versus Silva on the main card. Like, what are we doing here, dog? And then the prelims, don't get me wrong, they were okay. They were solid. It had the crafty Jim Miller submission and a Tybura ground and pound TKO, but this just wasn't as high quality of an MSG card as they usually are. I feel like they really dropped the ball on this one. So many of the fights were questionable, okay? And it just was a lot of stinkers and not memorable shit on this card. And what I do remember is just disliking this one pretty damn strongly. I believe that this pay-per-view was just one of the worst that 2024 had. I'm not even gonna lie to y'all. Oh, what about 297? Or, oh, what about 302? This is right up there in my opinion. I truly believe that, okay? I truly believe that, bro. And then you had 322. Literally one of the best main cards, at least on paper, we've ever seen. And most of the outcomes were pretty damn fun. Prates KOing Edwards, and Morales KOing Brady, and BSD KOing Benil. And then you had Bo Nickel KOing Vieira. I sound like Oprah, like, you get a knockout, you get a knockout, you get a knockout. But even on the prelims, you had Melwicker versus Ewing in a really fun fight. Rodriguez versus Kopylov was a nice back and forth, okay? I get that the main and co-main did stink it up for a lot of people. Shevchenko versus Whaley was just shit to watch, and most people didn't enjoy watching the main event. But at least there was like the high stakes. At least these fights mattered. At least they changed the outcomes of the timeline. Whereas Jones and Miocic and Oliveira versus Chandler too, we just didn't need that at all, on top of the fact like it just was a disappointing card overall, man, okay? So I think 322 clearly takes this one as the better card, man. Prelims were solid, okay? But the main card as a whole was pretty damn good, to where I think 322 definitely takes this one, okay? And moving on now to the last one we got, technically. So I understand that December, we haven't seen this year's pay-per-view go down yet. So I'm just going to be comparing like how stacked, or just the name value, whatever, how good of a card on paper was 310 versus 323. Obviously, I got to give it to 323. Okay, I said all that just to end up giving it to 323 here, right? 323, man, just seems fantastic. I feel like it's going to be really hard for the card not to deliver. From the very first fight of the night, you immediately have recognizable names and great matchmaking and matchups, to all the way to the main card. Fantastic main card as a whole, so much at stake. And so much name value as a whole to where I feel like we're going to get a lot of bangers or a lot of finishes. And just in general, man, what a way to have the final pay-per-view of all time really just go out, man. It's fantastic. I want to give respect to 310 though, man, okay? I get that it was lacking some things, you know, like Pantoja as a curl, great submission for Pantoja. Rachmanov versus Gary was a stinker, and then you had Gane versus Volkov, which was a robbery, whatever. But like Mitchell with the crazy ground and pound TKO. Same thing for Duho Choi, right? And in general, like the prelims had Dominic Reyes with the KO, Vicente Luque with a submission. Evloev versus Sterling was a really fun fight, and I'm going to stand my base on that, okay? Brian Battle is no longer with us, rest in peace. He ended up stinking it up, but whatever, man, okay? Andrews got a KO over Chris Weidman. Michael Chiesa got a crafty submission. Chase Hooper got a submission. Kennedy Nzechukwu got a nasty round one knockout. So in terms of 310, like I really remember like when it happened, I was like, wow, this was like one of the best pay-per-views in terms of the outcomes and entertainment that we got this year. So I want to put respect on it, but as a whole, 323 can't be beat. Great matchmaking. And when you look at the betting odds that are coming out, right, a lot of the fights are so close. There's barely any 2-1 favorites just because of how unpredictable it is and how good the goddamn matchmaking is for that one, okay? So in terms of the name value and on paper, what is the better pay-per-view? I'm going to give this one a 323, but all due respect to 310, okay? Because it was a really fun card. But again, we just don't know with 323 yet, okay? And I wanted to get this video out sooner than later. I didn't have the patience to wait. I'm sorry, okay? But in general, though, 2025 ended up edging it out, man. 2024 really had it worse with pay-per-views. It was a tough time. A lot of the fight nights sucked as well, whereas 2025 has had some pretty damn good pay-per-views, okay? Some stinker ones for sure. Don't get me wrong. There were some really rough ones, okay? I got to make that very clear. But in general, man, even the fight nights were pretty damn good this year. So in general, that's going to be it for this video, boys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, okay? Let me know what you guys think of where I got it right or where I got it wrong, and which pay-per-views you think were the best or the worst. Please let me know in the comments below. I would absolutely love to hear it, okay? All the smoke here as usual, guys. Thank you so very much for giving me your time and attention. No fights this weekend, but have a really good time with the pay-per-view next week. I'm going to have my predictions video hopefully coming out soon. Appreciate y'all a lot, man. Have a good one, guys.